music I listened to when I was growing up in Glasgow. I didn't realize it was folk music, but it was. My parents are Scots and Irish in Glasgow, and I used to listen to the songs sung a cappella with no guitar and no piano. But I also heard the songs of Frank Sinatra and Billie Holiday. Up until the age of 10, I absorbed a lot of traditional Irish and Scottish music, and of course my father read me poetry, because essentially I'm a poet, and I put music to my poems. As a young man, I read all the beat poems from Ginsberg and Kerouac and Ferlinghetti and Michael McClure and Rexroth, and so I was quite fascinated by what the Americans were doing. But I also read an enormous amount of British poetry. But the beat bohemian world is very important to the 20th century. It was the poets that were trying to bring back poetry to popular culture, because they knew that with poetry would come everything to do with the Bohemian Manifesto of free speech and of the introduction of ways of changing society. So I'm fascinated with the beats. Well, you know, my album, Sunshine Superman, is now understood to be the first psychedelic album, but it didn't only just introduce psychedelic experiences on not only LSD, but on mescaline and peyote, magic mushrooms. The Sunshine Superman album also was the first to reintroduce Celtic mythology, which we call Gaelic mythology in Ireland and Scotland. It also reintroduced the power of jazz and troubadour music. And it also introduced poetry. But the period that I grew up in, there was a great search to try to find out what the human sickness was all about. And Gypsy Dave and I, when we met when we were 16, we said, is the human race the most advanced species on the planet? And we came to the understanding that they were not. 2 world wars, a depression, and the systematic destruction of the ecosystem is not the highest evolved species on the planet. Something was wrong, and that's what led us immediately to Bohemia, the nearest Bohemian communities, and that is what invaded popular culture in the 60s. Season of the Witch, I didn't understand at the time, but it's become such a seminal, iconic song, and an extraordinary spooky feeling, but a very groovy tune to play. I would just say that maybe tens of thousands of bands played the song, and of course there are hundreds of videos on it. How it came about? It's 2 chords really, 3, but the second chord, the D9, I learned from Bert Jansch, and it's a very important chord if you're serious about playing folk, blues, classical and flamenco jazz guitar. You need this chord. It's a D9. It's very important. The song itself, it was prophetic. Things were not going all very well in the 60s, and it kind of speaks of a dark backlash that was going to come from the establishment to us all, and it did. Season of the Witch, a song that Led Zeppelin, Jimmy Page told me, Led Zeppelin used to do their sound checks with it on tour. What more can you want a song to be? It's many things for many people. That line, beatniks are out to make it rich, maybe it could be misunderstood that we weren't feeling altruistic as Bohemian beatniks. We were in it for the money. But what I really meant was, it's very simple. If you are highly skilled, talented, and you will now appeal to perhaps millions with your work as a Bohemian poet, singer, dancer, actor, film director, you won't stay long in Bohemia. You won't stay long in the beat circle. You will be plucked out by the nearest publisher for writers, director for an actor, record companies for a songwriter. You will be plucked out very fast. So beatniks are out to make it rich. We do want to appeal, But I have to say, we didn't really realize how big that appeal was going to be. So if you're an artist, you want your work to be seen. I am the Hurdy Gurdy Man, singing songs of love. I come singing songs of love. The Hurdy Gurdy Man was a figure up until the 18th century who traveled from town to town with a very unusual instrument called a hurdy gurdy. It turned a wheel, and the wheels moved across strings, and this instrument was carried by what you might call a newsman, because he traveled from town to town telling the news. So that's the story of the Hurdy Gurdy Man. But in actual fact, the Hurdy Gurdy Man, and the other level, is the teacher that we found, the Beatles and I and others, the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And it was he that gave us the technique to enter the inner spaces, the fourth level of consciousness, which we all came to understand, as all Bohemians do, that the illness of modern humanity, bent on destroying the planet and themselves, is a problem inside. And so the Hurdy Gurdy Man was the song that came out at the time. It came out at the time, the right time. In India, George wrote one of the verses, but I didn't include the verse on the recording, not because it wasn't great, but I do include it when I sing live. But it was the guitar power of the song which took all the time in the recording, which is very important because Hurdy Gurdy Man was really the first, what you might call blues metal folk, a ballad with a power guitar, which Led Zeppelin would develop afterwards. Sunshine Superman was originally for my darling Linda, who's still my darling muse, Linda, my wife, but it also was the lead song of the album of the same name, a very powerful song, and it brought a very interesting instrument called the harpsichord into popular music, and that's what I was doing. Superman, this year in America, it reached #1 50 years ago, September 3. Many of my songs were at least 25 years before their time and are only now being understood what they really were about. And that's the case for many of the songs of the 60s. So a song that is heavily resonant today would be not my song, Buffy Sainte-Marie's Universal Soldier, because there are great sufferings still going on with soldiers and wars. But the deepest resonant one, I would say, from my early 60s beginnings, that is most resonant, I would say, today, I would have to say it would be not a popular song, but it's much loved, and it's called Isle of Islay. And when I sing it, it lowers the heart rate and the blood pressure of the listener to as close as you can get to a meditative state. So a lot of my meditative songs are needed very resonantly today. The 50th anniversary tour is very important because a painter has a retrospective. In fact, my tour in Europe was called Retrospective, but overwhelmingly in America it's called Sunshine Superman Tour. But what it is a retrospective of a painter, a poet, or an artist, or a filmmaker, is very important because it's a body of work. And it's kind of presenting, after 50 years, the body of work of this artist-poet for you all to review it on your own, to see what part that this work played in history. By the way, next year I'm off on a completely new, different part of my career, and probably very heavily into film and possibly stage work, which is very exciting for me. You got to pick up